Hi and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of the Menageries Parts 1 and 2, which are episodes 11 and 12 of Star Trek The Original Series. This is a Patreon requested video requested by Allison Fordyce. So the Menagerie is a two-part episode where Spock steals the Enterprise and kidnaps his now handicapped and paralyzed former captain, Captain Pike, to try to take him to a forbidden planet against Starfleet regulations. However, when Kirk and a Commodore catch up to Spock, they court-martial him. However, at this stage, the Enterprise is locked on the course to this planet. So during the court-martial, Spock shows images of the events that occurred with Captain Pike on this planet and why he wants to go there. In these images, we see Pike first visiting this planet where they find a group of aliens that use illusions to fool people, and they wish to capture Pike in this sort of zoo and pair him with a human woman. He eventually finds a way to outsmart these aliens. However, it's revealed that the human woman had crashed there several decades before and is now disformed and disfigured, and it's only an illusion that the aliens are creating that she's beautiful. And so they leave and go on their merry way, and we find out the reason that Spock wants to take Pike there, who's now trapped in a wheelchair, is because the aliens can give him a life outside of the wheelchair, an illusion of being a healthy young man, and as well so he can live with this woman who also is trapped on the planet. And so they live happily ever after, and it's revealed that the Commodore never really existed in the first place and was just an illusion as well, so Spock is off the hook. So I put this in my top 10 favorite episodes of Star Trek The Original Series. I think I stand by that, but I find a lot of flaws in this episode, which I'll get to shortly. But the thing is that I like the cage and the menagerie, and I always go back and forth. It's always hard for me to say which one I like better. I don't want to put them both in my top 10 because that's a bit redundant, because it's basically the same episode. So if you don't know, the Cage was the original pilot for Star Trek that was rejected by NBC. So it has, Captain Pike, who's played by Jeffrey Hunter, I believe his name is, and totally different cast of characters. Leonard Nimoy and Spock is the only original character who's carried on. So that pilot was rejected, so they made another pilot a couple years later, which apparently is unheard of in TV. So they must have really liked some of the concepts of Star Trek, but not enough to buy the show, but enough to say, give it another try. So they gave it another try. This was more action-packed, and with William Shatner and some other, not McCoy yet, but I think Scotty was in there. But anyway, Spock was the only character who was carried over into the second pilot. And so when they were filming, when the show did get picked up with the second pilot and they were filming the first season, they found that they were way over budget when in the middle of filming the season, so they needed a way to save money to do episodes cheaply. So they thought, hey, we have this footage from this unused pilot that we haven't used, so they crafted this two-part episode, which mostly, I say, contains footage from the original pilot. I would say probably one episode's worth of new footage and one episode's worth of the old footage. So basically it saves them an entire episode because they already filmed the Cage. So they basically just show the Cage, which is the original pilot, during this episode, and they did a pretty good job of crafting a story that fits into the Cage. So they make it so that Pike was Spock's former captain, and and this happened 13 years ago, and to show you what happened to Pike now, even they couldn't get Jeffrey Hunter for this episode, so it's actually a different actor who plays the disabled Pike, but the fact that he's so disabled and has this makeup on, you can't really tell, so that's another great story. So I actually think they did a really genius job of weaving the story into the current Star Trek lore with Kirk and all that. So that's why I have a hard time finding out which one episode I like better, the Cage or the Menagerie, because originally, back in the 90s when I first started getting into Star Trek, I would probably say the Cage was the episode I put above the Menagerie. In fact, at one point I've even had the Cage as my favorite episode of all of Star Trek. Now, the Cage was not released in its entirety until like the 80s. In fact, like I saw old ads for it, and they're like, "This is the secret, the hidden Star Trek episode that nobody's seen before," which is not true because it was used in the Menagerie, so people had seen it before. But it was extended from what we saw in the Menagerie. There was more scenes in it that we didn't get in this two-parter. But it's basically the same thing, but it's more sort of self-contained and it's longer. But I think they call it the hidden, the forbidden, the secret episode, or whatever the hell they're calling it, is insincere in my opinion, because it's pretty much the same thing. But I don't know, like watching the Menagerie now, I'm kind of thinking maybe I do like the Cage better. But it's hard to say, because the Cage has a more complete focus on Pike, whereas in the Menagerie it was kind of disjointed, going back and forth between the Pike storyline and the current Spock court-martial storyline. So in that way I think I prefer the Cage, but I do really like the Spock stealing the Enterprise storyline as well. So I mean, that's why I decided to put the Menagerie ahead of the Cage in more recent years, because I do really appreciate that. Now, another thing from my personal experience with this episode is most people, because the Menagerie of course aired in the 60s with season 1, and the Cage wasn't released till the 80s, so it's like 2 decades later basically. So most people were already well familiar with the Menagerie before seeing the Cage, but me, I actually saw the Cage first, and I didn't see the Menagerie until like a year or so after I had seen the Cage. So I was already very familiar with the Cage, so by the time I saw this episode, it's like every time they flash back to the Cage, I'm like, well, I've already seen this. This is the Cage. So I wasn't surprised by that. So maybe that's why I favored the Cage, because that was my first into it. And and to be honest, for the longest time, and I think I probably would still say this still holds true, I prefer Captain Pike to Captain Kirk. In fact, if you compare like the Cage to Where No Man Has Gone Before, which was the other pilot they did with Kirk that got picked up, I think the Cage is way better. So it's kind of like a really knock on the studios that they were like, oh, we'll reject the show because of the Cage, but we'll pick it up. Well, this other episode that's nowhere near as good, because they're not looking at the quality of storytelling or how good the episode is. They're looking at, will this sell? Is there enough action in it? And there was enough action in the Cage, but there's like fighting and Where No Man's Gone Before, even though it wasn't interesting, it didn't really make sense. Why is Kirk having a fist fight with a godlike? I just think that I think it speaks very poorly of network television that Where No Man's Gone Before, and I think Kirk is too much of the typical hero stereotype. I said it before and I'll say it again. A lot of people are like, oh, how come you not have Kirk in your favorite characters list? Because he's not. I don't really care for Kirk that much. I'm sorry. I know this is going to piss a lot of people off, but I actually like Pike better. He was a more dynamic character. He had this more, he wasn't a straight out, fist fight, whatever. He was more flawed, and I think that actually makes him more interesting to watch. But anyway, so I was enamored with the whole Pike thing. That there was some, Star Trek novels and whatnot. I'd always buy them if it was about Pike, and I wish they should more. And actually watching this again makes me kind of excited to see if Pike will make an appearance in Star Trek Discovery, because at the season finale of Star Trek Discovery, they ran into the Enterprise where Pike is still the captain. And I noticed, like, watching the Menagerie, they mentioned it was 13 years before, and Discovery is supposed to take place 10 years before the original series. So the Discovery thing should be 3 years after the Menagerie if they keep the timeline, but who knows if they will. But they did say that Pike probably won't actually appear in Discovery, but Spock might. But I would rather see Pike. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. And don't even talk about what they did with Pike, that bullshit they did with Pike in the freaking reboots. The reboots are not Star Trek. They're bullshit anyway. Cover band bullshit. Anyway, back to the episodes at hand, the Menagerie. So, yeah, watching this episode again, like, I think I might favor the cage because there's just, even though I do really like the storyline in the first part with Spock, where it doesn't even start the cage till like towards the end of the episode. Most of the episode has to deal with, you know, Spock visiting Pike and he's in a wheelchair, and Kirk doesn't even realize that Pike's in a wheelchair. He shows that he still thinks that Pike is healthy and that he sent the message. And Spock knows full well he's in a wheelchair, but he's going along with this facade. And the Commodore says, "What? Nobody's told you? You mean you don't know?" And I don't think that excuses the fact that it's really stupid that he doesn't know. Just because they call it out and try to cover it up and have the Commodore be like, "Oh, what? Nobody's told you?" doesn't cover up for the fact that it's totally unbelievable that Kirk wouldn't know this. You know, I think it had happened somewhat recently, but still, if like a noted figure, someone who commanded the ship before him, someone who Spock's friend with, and the fact that Kirk never questioned Spock is like, "What, you didn't know this?" Which of course he did, but so anyway, I think the bigger issues I have with this episode, this format, is the way, like, alright, the biggest issue I have is that in the second part, at the very end, when it's revealed that the Commodore wasn't really there, he just disappears, he was an illusion done by the Telosians. Now, are they really that fucking powerful? Really? That the starbase, whatever, was light years away from Talos 4, and the Commodore left with Kirk on the shuttle at the starbase. But they're trying to tell me now that he didn't. It was an illusion that left the starbase with Kirk. So are these Telosians able to create illusions from like light years? I mean, that makes them extremely powerful. That makes making their planet Forbidden totally useless. They could just send out illusions on planets like light years away, all over the galaxy. Let's make illusions here, let's make illusions there. They'd be like Q or some shit. So that makes them unbelievably powerful, and I don't buy that. And plus, it's just cheesy. It's just so cheesy at the end. We're like, "Oh, the Commodore's not there." I mean, what does that do to the story? Nothing. I mean, you could say, "Oh, it makes it so that Spock was never court-martialed," but the fact that the Commodore doesn't there doesn't mean that the real Commodore doesn't know that Spock stole the Enterprise. He knows that. And they know that the Enterprise went to Talos 4 because they got communications from Starfleet Command, unless they're trying to tell me that's illusions too, which is more bullshit. So I don't buy the Spock being off the hook. Like the whole entire time it's like your career's over, you're done for, Spock. I hate you're totally fucked, blah 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 blah. And at the end it's like, ha ha ha, it's all good. And I don't know, I'm sorry, but the Commodore not really being there does not excuse this at all. But anyway, and the whole fact that Talos 4 was forbidden, that I don't buy. Oh no, not that it was forbidden. It requires the death penalty. The Federation is the only crime that the Federation will give the death penalty for. Really? Going to this planet, they'll kill you for it? I mean, sure, I understand these aliens are like really powerful and they have these illusions and stuff like that, but kill you if you go there? I mean, just especially thinking of death penalty, and you think about Picard times or other parts of Star Trek when they really think of the death penalty as barbaric, as and just really something that they've done centuries ago. Don't tell me, "Oh, Picard's 100 years later." No, they were saying centuries ago, not a century ago, but forever ago, like 20th century. And they don't look on the death penalty as an option. The fact, just by going to this planet, I just find that ridiculous. And plus, it's overkill. Just tell people that, "Oh, look, there's a powerful," like it was all top secret and they had this hidden document that only high brass had, and even that didn't say what actually happened, and being all secretive as need to know but should know. Why? Wouldn't it be better? I mean, I understand maybe why they wouldn't want to put it out to the general public, because then someone would think, maybe try to take advantage of these aliens or whatever. But Starfleet officers, especially fucking captains, why are you keeping it a secret from them? That makes no sense whatever. Say, hey, there's these dangerous aliens on the planet. Don't go there. You don't need to have a death penalty. Just say that. Just say they are able to create illusions. It's probably best if you just stay away from that planet. That simple. It is that fucking simple. But I'll tell you why the episode didn't do that. Plot. Because if they knew what had happened on the planet, then they wouldn't be able to watch on the TV the cage and experience for the first time what actually happened. Plus the whole sort of plot with Spock kept saying, they kept like stopping the cage in the middle and being like, oh, we're going to stop the court-martial, and Spock's like, oh, you have to keep watching, don't let the Commodore stop it, we have to keep watching it. That was fake stakes. That was a fake way to raise tension and to be like, oh, you know, and when really it's like, just watch the fucking thing. And plus, like, Spock could just tell them, be like, hey, there's these aliens that create illusions and they can help Pike. Like, they don't even need to watch the fucking cages. Like, it made no sense for Spock to not just tell them outright to keep it. Oh, you have to watch this episode of the cage in order to understand, when they fucking don't. But so that's why I'm starting to change my mind about the cage, because if you notice, all these nitpicks, all these issues that I have are with the Menagerie itself and not the cage. I don't know, but it's hard because I do really enjoy the stealing the Enterprise storyline. I do like the fact that Spock was in deep shit. I do like that it shows a lot to his character, that he was really willing to stick up for his former captain and put his life, like his whole entire career on the line. Life, really, because at that point, even though it's stupid, but put his life on the line in order to save his give his former captain a good life. So I did like that. That did speak a lot, very highly of his character, and I was like, I want to say, I don't know about only time, but it was definitely the first time that we've seen Spock really like show his, like, how much he cares about someone like that, especially someone who isn't Kirk. So that was great. I did enjoy that, and it was really suspenseful to the whole stealing the Enterprise and Kirk having to go in the shuttle to chase after him, and Spock had to decide, like, because the shuttle went past the point of no return, so Spock had to decide, if I keep going, then Kirk's gonna die. So he had to stop. But if he stopped and picked him up, that means he'd be done and he'd be court-martialed. But he chose, of course, to save Kirk's life. So that was interesting. That was fascinating. So it's rough but with the cage, none of these issues exist, and it's just straight out Pike, and that focuses more. I guess they're kind of different experiences, really, even though you see. They're not, as I said before, they're not totally different episodes, because, I mean, there's a few scenes in the cage that we don't get in the Menagerie, but most of them aren't that important. But there are sort of character buildings for that crew, which I enjoyed. So I think I'm going to change my mind and say I like the cage better. Maybe I'll put that on my top 10 from now on. But they're both good, and they both have their high points. Anyway, my rating for the Menagerie, parts 1 and 2, out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. As I said, in the past, I probably would have given this a 10, but after watching it again and seeing all these flaws that I can't ignore, I have to drop it to a 9. But it's still a really great episode. It's still really intense. I still love the cage and seeing the cage elements. I love what they did with it, because, oh, another thing I forgot to mention is that they changed the ending of the cage, because in the original pilot of the cage, Pike didn't go live with his aliens. They created an illusion of Pike for the woman, whatever her name was, Vala, I think, or whatever. They created an illusion of Pike for her to live happily ever after, but in the Menagerie they changed it to actually be Pike, who has his body back and is able to look and act like a young man again, and not be paralyzed. And I think that was brilliant. That was a brilliant character choice. So I did like it. They did a lot of good things by making the cage fit so perfectly into the current timeline, but there's just too many flaws. Anyway, That's it for my review of the Menagerie. This was a Patreon requested view. If you want to become a Patreon, there is a link in the description below. You can donate $1 to get my schedules or access to my Patreon-only videos. At the current moment, I'm doing my top 10 least favorite and my top 10 favorite directors, film directors of all time. It's just a lot of fun. And of course, if you donate $10 or more, you can request videos like this one. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with many more videos I do on Star Trek, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Babylon 5, and more. And thanks a lot for watching.